The Season She Left Behind by Amelia Winters. Chapter 1, A Return of Quiet Things. The train whispered into the station just as the first breath of autumn tugged at the hem of morning. Allura sat still, her gloved hands folded over a leather-bound notebook that hadn't been opened in months. It had once accompanied her everywhere like a shadow. Now it felt foreign against her palms, heavy with the silence she had learned to carry. Maplewood hadn't changed much in the years since she left. The station still wore its chipped green paint with humble pride, and the air smelled of wet leaves and something softer, something like memory. As she stepped down onto the platform, her boots met the wooden boards with a quiet tap, like punctuation at the end of a forgotten sentence. She hadn't told anyone she was coming. The house stood at the edge of town like a forgotten stanza, quiet, aged, and waiting. Its windows blinked at her through the soft fog that clung to the trees. There was something aching and beautiful about the way the light filtered through the gold-stained canopy of oaks that had watched her and her sister grow up beneath them. The door creaked open with no resistance, as though the house had known she'd return, as though grief had a key of its own. Inside, the dust lay undisturbed. Each room breathed stillness. Her footsteps stirred the quiet like wind through brittle pages. In the living room, the couch was exactly as they'd left it. Draped in a woolen throw her sister had always insisted made the room feel warmer, even if it wasn't. A mug still sat on the windowsill, faded rings at its base. The sight of it sent a tremor through her, small, like the flutter of wings. Allura did not cry. Not yet. She unpacked only the essentials, a sweater, a small lamp, her notebook. The rest stayed in the suitcase, folded in neat, untouched grief. She placed the notebook on the desk by the upstairs window and left it unopened. Afternoon crept in gently, bringing with it the golden hush that only small towns in October seemed to know. Allura wandered the narrow trails behind the house, where the woods curled around her like an old shawl. Leaves crunched beneath her boots, and with each step she felt the years peel back. There, where the wildflowers once grew in crooked rows. There, where they built their first fort with branches and blankets and stubborn dreams. She paused at the edge of the creek. The water moved slowly now, no longer rushing as it had when they were children racing leaves downstream. There was a smooth, flat stone at the water's bend, her sister's favorite spot. Allura remembered her sitting there, notebook in hand, scribbling secrets in poems she never read aloud. Words stay longer than people, she had said once, brushing her hair behind her ear. If you write them right. Allura had laughed at her then. She wished she hadn't. Back at the house, the wind had picked up. The trees sighed against the windows as dusk laid down its first shadows. She lit a fire in the hearth, the ritual of it strangely comforting. Crackle by crackle, warmth bloomed into the room. She watched the flames for a long time, until the edges of her vision softened and time seemed to still. Only then did she return to the desk. The notebook waited. She hesitated, her fingers brushing its worn cover. The leather was cracked in the corners, and the elastic band had long since loosened. She opened it slowly, half expecting the blank pages to judge her for leaving them untouched so long. But the pages didn't judge. They received her like an old friend, silent and open. She picked up the pen. The trees remember what we forget. The wind knows our names, even when we do not speak them. Autumn, you were always her season. And now, somehow, you are mine. The words came carefully, as if stepping barefoot into a once familiar room. But they came, and Alara felt something shift. Not loudly, not completely, but enough. Enough to stay. That night, the wind whispered through the eaves like a song half remembered. Alara dreamt of her sister barefoot, laughing, surrounded by leaves that danced like amber fire. She didn't speak in the dream, but Alara understood her anyway. When she awoke, the sky was blushing with dawn. And for the first time in a long time, Alara wrote before she rose. Chapter 2: The Scent of October Rain. The morning came with the hush of rain, soft, rhythmic, and persistent. It tapped gently on the window panes like a visitor too polite to knock. Alara rose slowly, wrapping herself in the same gray cardigan she'd worn since yesterday, its sleeves stretched and familiar. She stood by the upstairs window, mug in hand, watching the rain bead down the glass in crooked rivulets. Maplewood was quiet beneath the veil of weather. The trees bowed slightly with the weight of water, their amber leaves darkened to rust. In the distance, smoke rose in thin ribbons from the chimneys of the town below, curling into the pale sky like breath. She'd forgotten how beautiful melancholy could be. Downstairs, she buttered a slice of bread and left it uneaten. The house was cold this morning, the kind of cold that curled into the corners of things. She lit the fireplace again, grateful for its company. The flame flared once, then settled into a quiet flicker. Her notebook lay open on the desk, her pen resting like a sleeping creature. Last night's words remained on the page, delicate and unassuming. She traced them with her finger, not editing, not doubting, just remembering. For years she had stopped writing, not because she had nothing to say, but because the act itself became a reminder of what she'd lost. Her sister, Mira, had always encouraged her poems, even when they were little more than stringed fragments of thought. Mira had read every piece aloud as though each syllable mattered. Alara never told her, but she wrote for the sound of her sister's voice more than anything else. She reached for the pen again. I dreamed you were still alive, Mira. You were standing in the rain, laughing, letting it soak through your dress. You said nothing, but your eyes were louder than words. I wanted to step into that silence and stay there forever. The ink dried slowly, as though the rain outside had found its way inside the page. Later that day, Alara walked into town. She kept her coat buttoned tight, scarf tucked under her chin. Maplewood's main street was lined with small shops whose windows glowed warmly against the gray. She passed the bookstore first, Whitmore's. It still said in hand-painted gold script on the glass. The bell above the door jingled softly when she stepped inside. The scent hit her immediately, dust, cedar, and paper. It was the scent of Saturdays spent reading on the floor beside Mira, each of them silently competing to finish more pages. An elderly man with kind eyes and silver hair looked up from the counter. "Ilara?" he said, blinking. "Ilara Finch?" She smiled, uncertain. "Hello, Mr. Whitmore." "Well, I'll be," he said, rising from his stool. "It's been years. Your sister used to come in every week, rain or shine." "I know," Ilara said softly. "She brought me with her most days." "She always asked for poetry," he added, eyes drifting toward the corner shelf. "Said it helped her see things better." Ilara glanced in that direction. The poetry section was still modest, half a wall of slim spines and delicate fonts. She reached for a familiar title, Rilke, Myra's favorite, and turned it over in her hands. "I miss her," Mr. Whitmore said, not with sadness, but reverence. "She had a way of making you feel like you were the only one in the room." "She had a way of doing that," Ilara echoed. He didn't ask why she'd returned. He didn't need to. Grief is fluent in silence. She left with a worn copy of the book tucked under her arm. The rain eased by mid-afternoon. On her walk back, Ilara passed by the old playground near the school. The swings creaked in the wind, empty and moving. She paused by the fence, watching the slide glisten with leftover rain. She remembered Mira pushing her on those swings, laughing when Ilara kicked too high and nearly fell backward. "Fly, bird," Mira used to call out. "Fly as high as you dare." Ilara stood there a while, until the cold crept back into her fingers. Then she returned home. That evening, she pulled a box down from the attic. It was labeled Mira in neat black letters. Inside, she found notebooks, pressed leaves between paper, Polaroids curled at the edges. At the bottom was a cassette tape, unlabeled. She hesitated before slipping it into the old player by the fireplace. The machine clicked softly, then whirred. And then Myra's voice. "Ilara," it began, full of warmth. "If you're hearing this, I'm probably already driving you crazy from beyond." Ilara gasped softly, her hand trembling over her mouth. "I found this poem you wrote when you were 13. You called it 'The Moon Has Secrets.' It was terrible," Mira laughed, "but it made me cry. So I guess terrible isn't the right word." A pause. Then, "Don't stop writing, Lori, even if I'm not there to read them. Write, because the world needs your voice, even if it's quiet. Especially if it's quiet." Ilara sat still for a long time after the tape ended. The fire had dimmed, the night deepened, but something inside her began to stir. Not just memory, not just sorrow, but the slow blooming of something like purpose. She opened her notebook again, pages fluttering like wings. I thought I buried you in silence, but you bloom in sound. Every word I write carries your name in its breath. She closed the notebook gently, and this time she smiled. Outside, the rain had stopped. The stars were beginning to show. Chapter 3, Where the Leaves Remember. The next morning, sunlight filtered through the trees like golden thread woven into a tapestry of shadows. The storm had passed, leaving behind a stillness that felt sacred. Alara stood barefoot on the porch, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders, watching the mist lift from the dewy grass as if the earth itself were slowly exhaling. The world seemed softer in the wake of rain. Trees glistened with memory. The old swing on the maple swayed gently in the breeze, though no one touched it. And Alara felt, for the first time in weeks, as if something invisible inside her had shifted. Not mended, not healed, but shifted, like soil after a long frost. She had slept with the cassette tape beside her bed, as if Myra's voice could anchor her through the tides of night. In a way, it had. She had dreamed, not of loss, but of laughter. And when she awoke, the ache was quieter. After breakfast, she walked the perimeter of the backyard, a familiar path from childhood, where her feet seemed to know each stone and rise in the earth. She found herself drawn to the old treehouse, hidden behind a thicket of ivy-covered birch trees. Time had not been kind to it. The wood was splintered, the rope ladder frayed, yet it still stood, as though determined to hold every echo that had once lived within its walls. The trapdoor creaked when she climbed up, but the boards held her weight. Inside, dust motes spun lazily in the sunlight that slipped through the cracks. Alara crouched down and found an old box of colored pencils, the ends worn to soft nubs. Myra's were always in reds and oranges. Fire shades, she used to say. Pinned to one wall was a faded note in Myra's handwriting. We are made of stories, not skin. That's why the body breaks, but the soul goes on singing. Alara closed her eyes and let the moment wash over her. In this small wooden room, she could still feel her sister's presence, not in ghostly whispers or imagined touches, but in the vivid aliveness of memory. Here, time had bent for them once, folded gently like pages in a well-read book. Later that day, Alara wandered into town again, this time toward the edge of the lake where the trees opened like curtains to reveal the shimmering waters of Crescent Hollow. She sat on a bench with a view of the water's edge, where ducks glided across its surface like brushstrokes on canvas. Children laughed in the distance, tossing breadcrumbs into the ripples. Nearby, a man with a sketch pad sat cross-legged, capturing the changing light with sweeping charcoal lines. Alara didn't speak to anyone. She simply listened to the lake, the wind, the rustling branches. To her own thoughts, at last, no longer loud and chaotic, but calm and layered, like the rings inside an old oak. As she pulled out her notebook, she noticed a woman watching her from the path, a stranger with kind eyes and a curious expression. "Excuse me," the woman said gently, "are you Alara Finch?" Alara hesitated. "Yes." The woman stepped forward. She wore a forest green coat and carried a small tote filled with autumn leaves, each labeled with botanical notes. A naturalist, perhaps. "I'm sorry for intruding," the woman continued. "My name is Iris. I teach literature at the school now. Mira used to help with the poetry club before she passed." Alara's heart flickered. "She spoke of you often," Iris added, "with so much affection." Alara gave a soft, surprised smile. "She never said." "I think she didn't want to embarrass you," Iris said, chuckling, "but she believed in your writing." "I haven't written much in years." Iris sat down beside her. And yet, here you are, with a notebook in your hands. Ilara looked down, surprised by the truth of it. I've started again. There's a reading next week at the school, Iris said after a pause. A small gathering, students and a few teachers. We're sharing original poems. You're welcome to join. Ilara felt something catch in her throat. Fear, perhaps, or the first breath of courage. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she whispered, "I'll think about it." And Iris, sensing her need for space, only nodded. That evening, back at home, Ilara sat at the kitchen table with a candle flickering beside her. She held Myra's Rilke book in her lap and her own journal open before her. She wrote with care, the words coming slowly, like fallen leaves carried gently on wind. There are things I never said. Not because I didn't feel them, but because I thought we had time. But time is not a promise. It is a season. And seasons, my love, always leave. She paused, her pen suspended above the page, her breath catching in the delicate silence. The scent of cinnamon drifted from the stove. Earlier, she had baked Myra's favorite apple bread the way their mother once did. The smell filled the rooms with memory and sweetness, warmth and ache. Outside the window, the trees were beginning to burn with color, fiery crimsons, golds like harvest light, and amber so rich it could melt. Autumn had begun its slow transformation. So had Ilara. Chapter 4: The Weight of Words. The days that followed drifted like the soft rustling of leaves in an autumn breeze, quiet yet full of change. The mornings were touched with fog, the afternoons bathed in golden warmth, and the evenings crisp with the promise of the coming frost. Ilara found herself drawn to the rhythm of nature once more. She walked often, her feet tracing the paths she had once known so well, as though the earth beneath her held a quiet language she was only now learning to understand. On the fourth day after Iris's visit, Ilara found herself standing at the old community center, the one Mira had frequented so often. It was a building of faded red brick, with ivy creeping up its sides like a secret too slow to hide. The windows were tall and rectangular, their frames painted white, now chipped and peeling from the years. Inside, the room hummed with low conversation, and the smell of coffee lingered in the air like an old memory. The poetry reading had begun, and students stood at the front, their voices trembling in the quiet room as they recited their words. Ilara watched, her heart thumping softly in her chest, as each person took their turn, some confident, some unsure. But each of them spoke with a truth that moved through the air, like the wind that passed through the trees outside. When it was Iris's turn, she stepped forward, her hands steady as she unfolded a small sheet of paper. She spoke of autumn, of the way the earth prepared itself for winter's sleep, and how, even in the silence of the season, there was a promise of rebirth. Her voice was warm, full of care, but there was a tremor to it, a tenderness that made Ilara's heart ache in the most unexpected way. Ilara felt the pull, the gentle tug of a moment she had never expected. The words that Iris spoke echoed in her mind, reaching her in places she hadn't even known existed. The weight of loss was something they shared, something that tethered them both to this place, to this season. And for the first time in years, Ilara understood that loss was not a burden to be carried alone. The event was small, but for Alara, it felt as though the walls had closed in around her. She could feel Myra's absence like a heavy cloak over her shoulders, a silent reminder that her sister's presence had once filled spaces just like this one. The memories of Mira, of her laughter, her words, swirled in her mind, reminding Alara of what she had lost, but also what she still carried within her. As the last person finished reading, Iris caught Alara's gaze across the room. She smiled warmly, that same knowing smile she had offered in the park. Alara returned the smile, though it felt fragile, like something that might break if touched too hard. The room began to empty slowly, the echo of conversations mingling with the soft clink of coffee cups and chairs scraping against the wooden floor. Alara lingered, watching the others leave, until only a few remained, picking up their belongings and chatting quietly among themselves. Her heart was in her throat, and she stood there, rooted to the spot, as though some invisible force had kept her in place. Iris approached her then, her steps light and purposeful. "Did you find anything in their words?" she asked gently. Alara took a deep breath, the weight of the question settling in her chest. "I think." She paused, unsure how to put it into words. "I think I forgot what it was like to listen to them, to listen to people who speak so honestly. It's different than anything I've felt in a long time." Iris nodded, her eyes thoughtful. "That's the power of poetry. It lets you hear what's hidden in the spaces between. Sometimes we don't even know what we're holding until we say it out loud." Alara considered this, her gaze lowering to the notebook tucked under her arm, the one she had begun to fill with words again, slowly, hesitantly, as though each letter were a tiny sacrifice of herself. "You're a poet," Iris said, more of a statement than a question. "You know that, don't you?" Alara shook her head, the words feeling strange on her tongue. "I don't know. Not anymore." "Then I'll leave you with a thought," Iris said softly. "Poetry isn't about being perfect. It's about being real. The words may come slowly, but they will come. And when they do, you'll see that it's not about what's lost. It's about what's left." Alara watched her go, her words lingering in the air long after Iris had disappeared into the night. There was a silence in Alara then, a quiet space where she could almost feel Mira standing beside her, urging her forward. She left the community center that night, the streets glowing faintly under the soft light of the street lamps, her heart heavy with a new understanding. The next step was uncertain, but it was there, waiting for her. And for the first time, she was ready to take it. The following week, as the leaves began to fall in earnest, Alara found herself once again at the lake. The air was colder now, crisp with the bite of autumn, but the scene was just as beautiful, calm, reflective, as if the world had slowed for just a moment. Alara sat down on the same bench, the one where she had met Iris, and opened her notebook. She wrote slowly, carefully, her pen tracing the shapes of her thoughts as if they were something precious, something fragile. Her hand moved across the page with a grace she hadn't known she was capable of, as if each word was an offering. "I have come back to this place, where the water whispers secrets in the dark, where the trees bend low with age and wisdom, where the weight of silence is heavy, and yet somehow free. In the stillness I find you. In the falling leaves I hear your voice." She closed the notebook then, a small, contented sigh slipping from her lips. The words were simple, but they were hers, and for the first time in a long while, they felt like enough. She stood and turned, her footsteps light as she walked away from the lake, leaving the evening to its quiet mystery. Chapter 5: The Threads Between Us. The mornings had grown colder, a sharpness to the air that bit through Alara's sweater, but she didn't mind it. There was something about the chill that made her feel more awake, more alive, like the world was trying to remind her of things she had forgotten. Her notebook, too, had become a constant companion, its pages filling up slowly, steadily, with words that felt like fragments of a puzzle she was piecing together. Each line was a step forward, each thought a whisper she hadn't realized she'd been searching for. Yet, even as the words came, there was a quiet, haunting presence in her writing, Myra's absence, like the stillness of a room after someone leaves, the air heavy with what's missing. But it was in the quietness of her thoughts that Alara began to hear her sister again, not as a shadow, but as a voice beneath the surface of her own. Mira's words had always been bold, direct, a little wild. She had a way of capturing the world in sweeping strokes, of seeing things that Alara couldn't always reach. And now, in the hollow spaces between her words, Alara felt her sister's voice, urging her to keep going, to keep writing, even if the words felt too small to contain all that she had lost. One afternoon, as Alara sat by the window, the golden light pouring in and catching the edges of the leaves outside, she decided to walk into town again. The air was crisp with the tang of winter approaching, the trees stripped of their vibrant color, their branches bare against the soft gray sky. Yet there was still beauty in the silence of the season's change, a quiet promise that everything would return in its own time. The town was bustling in the way small towns are, people moving in and out of stores, the hum of everyday life filling the streets. Alara had come to know this rhythm again, to find comfort in the simplicity of it, though it still felt like something she had almost forgotten. She passed the bakery where the smell of fresh bread lingered in the air, the bookstore where the shelves were laden with old stories waiting to be read, and the cafe where the clink of cups was punctuated by the soft murmur of conversation. It was when she reached the old bridge over the creek that she stopped. The view was one of her favorites, the water flowing beneath, the bridge arching gracefully overhead, the quiet hum of life all around her. She had spent hours here with Mira when they were children, their laughter echoing over the stones, their voices light and carefree. And yet now, standing there alone, Alara felt the weight of time settle in her chest. It wasn't just Myra's absence that lingered. It was the absence of the time they had once shared so easily, the way things had seemed endless then. She remembered how they would race to the bridge, their footsteps quick and light, their hearts full of promises that now felt like dreams fading into the past. Alara. The voice came softly from behind her, and Alara turned to find Iris standing on the far side of the bridge, her coat pulled tight against the cold. She had a cup of coffee in her hand, steam rising in the crisp air. "I didn't mean to startle you," Iris said, a smile softening her features. "No, you didn't. I was just lost in thought," Alara replied, her voice distant. "It's hard not to think about the past sometimes." Iris nodded, her eyes understanding. She crossed the bridge slowly, taking a sip from her cup before speaking again. "I can't imagine what it's like to lose someone so close. But I think," she paused, as if choosing her words carefully, "I think you're carrying something beautiful, even if it doesn't feel that way yet. A part of her, maybe, in your words, in your silence. She's still with you, Alara." The truth of Iris's words sank deep into Alara's chest, and she closed her eyes for a moment, letting the wind tug at her hair, feeling the weight of everything that had been and everything that still was. "I don't know if I can let go," Alara whispered, her voice catching in the wind. "Not of her. Not of what we had. It's all tied up together, my writing, the things I'm still holding on to, and I don't know how to move forward when I'm still holding her here, with me." Iris was silent for a long moment, her gaze fixed on the water flowing beneath them. Finally, she spoke again, her voice softer now, almost as though she were speaking to herself as much as to Alara. "Maybe you don't have to let go. Maybe you just need to find a way to live with it. The words, the memories, the grief, it's all part of who you are now. But it doesn't have to weigh you down. It can guide you, instead. Lead you to something new." Alara looked at Iris, a flicker of something, hope, maybe, or clarity, crossing her face. I'm not sure I understand what that means yet. You will, Iris said gently, in your own time. The days that followed were filled with small, quiet shifts within Alara. The morning fog began to retreat earlier, leaving behind the clarity of the sky. The light was changing too, warmer in the afternoons, softer in the evenings. The transition from autumn to winter was inevitable, but there was something comforting in the way the world moved in cycles, its rhythms steady, its promises quiet. Alara continued to write, though the words no longer came with the weight they once had. They flowed more easily now, as though the act of writing itself had become a place of solace, not just a place of pain. Myra's absence remained, but it was no longer something that broke her. It was something that softened her edges, gave her the space to be both broken and whole at once. She found herself waking early each day to write by the window, her pen moving across the pages, tracing the contours of memory, of loss, of love. And as the days passed, she noticed the changes within her, the quiet way the grief shifted, the way it no longer suffocated her but gently settled into her life like a familiar companion. She had begun to live with the silence, and in that silence, she had found a kind of peace. Chapter 6: The Leaves That Whispered. The world had taken on the color of twilight, everything dipped in the soft hues of amber and gold, the leaves drifting slowly to the ground like memories. Alara often found herself walking through the woods near the house, letting the crisp autumn air fill her lungs, trying to breathe in all the change, all the fleeting beauty. The path she wandered was one she and Mira had often walked together, their laughter a soundtrack to the rustling of the leaves. Now, as Alara stepped carefully over the uneven earth, there was a silence around her that felt heavier than the absence of her sister. It was the silence of things left unsaid, of things that once lived in their conversations, but now hung suspended in the space between her thoughts and the reality she faced alone. She paused by an old oak tree, its gnarled branches stretching like hands toward the sky, dark and empty against the pale blue. The tree had always been there, ever constant, ever strong. Alara found herself reaching up, fingers brushing the bark as though she were seeking some kind of connection, some tether to the past, to Mira. The wind picked up, sending a flurry of leaves scattering around her feet. Each one, a delicate flutter in the air, seemed to echo a quiet invitation to let go, to surrender. Yet the thought of truly surrendering, of letting the memories go, of letting her sister slip entirely into the past felt impossible. How could she? How could anyone? That evening, as the golden light began to fade and the shadows grew longer, Alara sat at the kitchen table, a cup of tea warm between her hands. The room was dim, lit only by the soft glow of a single lamp in the corner. There was a comforting stillness in the air, the kind that made the house feel like a sanctuary, even when the heart felt heavy. Her mind wandered, as it often did, back to the old house they had grown up in. The room still held echoes of their childhood, of Mira's music playing softly in the background, of the two of them curled up with books, of late-night conversations filled with plans, hopes, and unspoken dreams. Yet, as the days passed and the leaves fell from the trees, the house began to feel more like a stranger. It was as though the walls were no longer able to hold all the pieces of her memories, each one slipping further away, the weight of them almost too much to bear. The next morning, Alara decided to walk into town once more, though today the sky was darker, the clouds hanging low and heavy as if the world itself was mourning. She pulled her coat tightly around her and set off, the familiar path beneath her feet steady but uncertain. When she reached the cafe, she found Iris sitting by the window, a book open in front of her, though she wasn't reading it. Her gaze was fixed on something outside, something only she could see. Alara hesitated at the door for a moment before pushing it open. The warmth of the cafe wrapped around her like a blanket, and she made her way to the table where Iris sat, a faint smile crossing Iris's face as she noticed her approach. "Good morning," Alara said, settling into the chair across from her. "Morning," Iris replied, her eyes soft, understanding, as always. "How are you feeling?" Ilara hesitated, unsure how to answer. The truth was, she wasn't sure. There were days when she felt as though she were inching closer to something, some understanding, some peace. But then there were the other days, the days when the silence seemed too vast, too infinite, and the loss too overwhelming to carry. Ilara trailed off, unsure how to finish. I think I'm still learning how to be here without her. Iris nodded, her fingers tracing the rim of her coffee cup absent-mindedly. It's not something you can rush, you know? Grief doesn't have a timetable. It's just something you live with, and as time passes, it doesn't necessarily get easier. But it changes. It becomes a part of you, not something you can ever truly leave behind. Ilara looked down at her hands, the weight of Iris's words settling deep inside her chest. I don't know if I can let go, she whispered, her voice barely audible. You don't have to, Iris said softly. Not now. Not ever. But maybe one day, you'll find that it's not about letting go. It's about finding a way to live with it, to carry it and still live fully, to let it guide you rather than hold you back. Ilara looked up, meeting Iris's gaze. There was something in Iris's eyes, something kind and gentle that made her feel less alone. For a moment, she felt as though the weight of her grief had been shared, a burden lightened, even just a little. Later that evening, Ilara returned to the house and stood at the edge of the garden, the last rays of the setting sun casting long shadows across the earth. The leaves had all but fallen now, and the once vibrant colors had given way to browns and muted yellows. Still, there was beauty in the transition, in the quiet acceptance of the changing season. As she stood there, a thought stirred in her mind, a faint whisper of something she hadn't considered before. Perhaps it wasn't about forgetting Mira. Perhaps it wasn't about moving on. Perhaps, she thought, it was about honoring what had been, honoring Mira's spirit and the love they had shared, and finding a way to carry it with her, not as a weight, but as a part of her own story. The next morning, Ilara sat at her desk by the window, her notebook open before her. The first lines of a new poem began to take shape, the words flowing more freely now, no longer tethered by the weight of her grief. It was as if she had given herself permission to write from the place of love, not loss. As the ink began to spread across the page, Ilara felt something shift within her, something soft, something healing. She wasn't running from her grief anymore. She was letting it become a part of her, like the autumn leaves, fragile, beautiful, and inevitable. She paused for a moment, the quill still hovering over the paper, and for the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to believe that there might be a way forward, a way to move through the grief and still find joy, a way to remember and still live. Chapter 7: The Shifting Tides. Ilara woke to the quiet whisper of the wind outside her window, the sound of branches gently brushing against one another like the soft murmur of a long-forgotten song. The autumn air had grown crisp with the changing days, and she felt it deep in her bones, the change of seasons, both in the world around her and in herself. The house felt different now, as if the walls were beginning to breathe again, shedding the heavy weight of grief that had pressed against them since Mira's death. The warmth that had once seemed so absent had slowly returned, like sunlight creeping through the cracks of a long-closed door. It had been nearly 2 months since she'd arrived back at the house, since the wind first whispered the promise of something new. Yet in the stillness of her mornings there remained a tenderness that was not easily forgotten, a silence that carried 1,000 words. Ilara sat at her desk again, the old, familiar notebook in front of her. She had written often in these past weeks, poems and thoughts spilling onto the pages like an offering to the past. But something had shifted now, something deeper. Her words no longer came from the depths of sorrow, but from a place of understanding, of quiet acceptance. Today, she had the sense that something was about to change, though she could not yet see it clearly. She felt it like a vibration in the air, a prelude to something new, something both unsettling and necessary. She could not hold the stillness forever, and she had come to understand that perhaps this was the moment to move forward, to seek something beyond the ghosts of yesterday. Later that afternoon, Ilara decided to take a walk along the path that wound through the forest behind the house. The leaves had mostly fallen now, leaving the trees bare, their limbs reaching toward the sky like skeletal arms. There was something striking in the contrast between the gray sky and the earth beneath her feet, an image of loss and renewal, side by side. As she walked, her thoughts drifted to Mira. She imagined her sister's laughter echoing through the woods, a sound that used to fill the air with life. The memory of their childhood together felt distant, yet so close at the same time, like the fading echo of a song she could still almost hear. The path curved ahead, and Alara's gaze was drawn to a small clearing she had not noticed before. It was sheltered by the trees, and in the center stood a stone bench, worn by time but still strong. Something about the place drew her in, and she approached it slowly, as if afraid of disturbing the quiet serenity that seemed to hang in the air. She sat on the bench, her fingers tracing the surface of the stone. There was a peace here, a stillness that felt as though it were waiting for her to notice, to surrender to it. The wind whispered through the trees again, and Alara closed her eyes, letting the cool air wash over her. It was in this moment, in the quiet and the solitude, that the shift she had been sensing all day began to become clear. It was not something grand or dramatic, not some earth-shattering revelation, but a small, quiet truth that slipped into her heart without warning. She realized, in that instant, that she had been waiting for a sign, a moment when the world would give her permission to live again, to step beyond the shadow of her grief. But there would be no grand gesture, no dramatic shift. The permission had always been there, within her, quietly waiting to be claimed. The tears that had threatened to come for weeks now finally spilled over, not in anguish, but in release. Alara let the tears fall, the quiet sobs coming in waves, and she allowed herself to mourn, not just for Mira, but for everything she had lost. And in that mourning, she also allowed herself to forgive. Forgive the world for taking her sister, forgive herself for the things left unsaid, forgive the past for its imperfections. She forgave the house, the trees, the very earth beneath her feet, for not being able to hold everything she had lost. And slowly, the weight of it all began to lift, not in an instant, but in the slow, steady process of breathing through it. The grief would never disappear, but it could coexist with the newness of life. It could coexist with the knowledge that she was allowed to move forward, even if that forward was only one step at a time. When Alara returned to the house later that evening, the air felt different. The shadows in the corners of the rooms no longer felt heavy with memories, but seemed to pulse with possibility. The house, too, was beginning to breathe again, its walls stretching wide as if exhaling the tension of the past months. She moved into the kitchen, her hands steady as she prepared a simple meal. As the vegetables simmered on the stove, the house began to fill with warmth once more. Physical warmth, yes, but also the warmth of acceptance, of the knowledge that life continued, even when it seemed impossible. Alara sat at the table, the evening light casting a soft glow across the room. She allowed herself to savor the quiet, to feel the stillness, but with the understanding that it would not last forever. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new memories to carry. But for tonight, she was content to simply be, to live in this moment of peace. And as the days passed, Alara found herself returning to the small stone bench in the clearing, returning to the quiet truth that had settled within her. Grief, she realized, was not a mountain to climb. It was a journey through a forest, and though the path was uncertain, it was hers to walk. Chapter 8. Beneath the Surface. The first frost had arrived. Alara stepped outside early one morning to find the world painted in shades of silver, each blade of grass and fallen leaf dusted with a delicate coating of ice. The coldness of the morning air seeped into her skin, but instead of feeling harsh, it seemed to wake her. The world was no longer muted by autumn's fading glow. Now everything sparkled with clarity, every detail sharp and crisp against the pale sky. She walked toward the garden, her boots crunching over the frost-covered ground. She had come to love these early mornings, the moments when the world seemed to pause, holding its breath as if waiting for something unseen to unfold. There was a peace in the stillness, a quiet that settled deep within her soul. But it was a peace tinged with something else, something she could not yet name, though she knew it was there, just beneath the surface. In the garden, where the last remnants of flowers clung stubbornly to their stems, Alara knelt and brushed her fingers over the frozen earth. Beneath the cold, life still stirred. She could feel it, tiny roots still seeking, still reaching, and for the first time in months, she felt something stir within her too. Something small, but undeniable. She had spent so much time tending to the house, to her grief, to memories that had long since faded, but now it was time to tend to herself. She stood, brushing the dirt from her hands, and looked up at the house. It seemed different this morning, as if the first frost had brought something new with it, something that had not yet been fully understood but was waiting to unfold. She had spent so long trying to hold on to the past, to keep Mira close, to preserve every fleeting memory. But now, in the cold quiet of the garden, she realized something. In order to move forward, she had to let go, not of Mira, but of the weight of grief that had kept her anchored in the past. Later that day, Alara found herself at the edge of the town, her footsteps slow as she walked toward the familiar old bookstore. The bell above the door chimed softly as she entered, the scent of old paper and ink wrapping around her like a forgotten lullaby. The shelves were filled with the same books she had always known, their spines faded from years of handling, their pages well-worn and comforting. Iris was sitting at the counter, sorting through a stack of books, her eyes bright when she saw Alara. "There you are," she said, her voice warm. "I was wondering when you'd come by." Alara smiled softly, stepping further into the shop. "I thought I might find something to read," she said. "Something new." Iris raised an eyebrow, as if she knew exactly what Alara meant. "Looking for something to stir the soul, then?" Alara nodded, her gaze drifting across the shelves. "Something that will remind me that life is still full of surprises." Iris smiled knowingly and reached for a book on the highest shelf, a slim volume with a deep green cover. She handed it to Alara, her fingers lingering just a moment longer than necessary. "This one," she said, "has a way of making the heart open wide. It's about letting go, but not in the way you might think." Alara took the book, the weight of it in her hands familiar and grounding. "Thank you," she said quietly, feeling the stirrings of something both painful and beautiful, settling deep within her. That evening, as Alara sat by the fire with the book in her lap, the world outside the window grew darker. The first frost had given way to a quiet snow, the snowflakes falling in gentle silence, covering the earth with a soft, white blanket. The room was warm, the fire crackling and dancing, but Alara's mind was still with the garden, with the feeling she had gotten this morning that something beneath the surface had shifted. She opened the book and began to read. The words were simple yet profound, each sentence a quiet invitation to surrender, to let go of the things that no longer served her, and to make space for new beginnings. It was a slow, quiet realization, one that was hard to put into words. She had spent so much time holding tight to what had been, to memories of her sister, to the life they had shared. But now, as she read, she felt a deep sense of peace wash over her. It wasn't that she had to forget, but rather that she had to allow space for the future, for what might still be. She closed the book and sat back, letting the quiet settle around her. The fire flickered, casting shadows on the walls, and for the first time in a long while, Alara felt a sense of peace that was not rooted in absence, but in possibility. The night stretched on, and Alara allowed herself to simply be. She could feel the change deep within her, like the snow outside, slow, quiet, and inevitable. It was a change she had been waiting for, even though she hadn't known it. She had been so focused on preserving the past that she had forgotten how to embrace the future. But now she could feel the stirrings of something new within her, something she was ready to welcome. The next morning, Ilara woke early again, the first light of dawn spilling into the room through the window. The snow had continued through the night, leaving the world transformed. Everything was still and quiet, the earth holding its breath beneath a blanket of white. Ilara dressed quickly and went outside, her boots leaving deep impressions in the fresh snow as she made her way toward the clearing where the stone bench stood. As she sat down on the cold stone, she felt the stillness of the world around her, and for a moment she allowed herself to simply breathe. The peace she had sought for so long was not a destination, she realized. It was something that lived within her, something that had always been there, waiting for her to notice. It was not in the past, not in the memories, but in the present, right here, right now, in the simple act of breathing, of being. And in that moment, Ilara made a decision. It was time to live again, not just for the past, not just for the memories of Mira, but for herself, for the person she was becoming, for the future she was stepping into. It was time to let go of the weight of grief, not by forgetting, but by carrying it with her as she moved forward. She stood from the bench and turned back toward the house, the snow beneath her feet light and untouched. The world was waiting for her, just as it always had. Chapter 9: The Unspoken Words. The air felt different that morning, thicker, charged with the energy of something unspoken. Ilara woke early, the pale light of dawn creeping through the curtains, casting soft shadows across her room. She had been sleeping better, the restless tossing and turning replaced with dreams that felt real, vivid, like she was walking through memories yet to come. For a moment, she lingered in the warmth of her bed, the soft linens inviting her to stay just a little longer, but the pull of the world outside was undeniable. The quiet of the house, the deep stillness that had become her refuge, felt strangely suffocating now. She could no longer hide within the walls of the past, within the echo of Myra's absence. It was time to step out into the world again, to face the quiet that she had avoided for so long. She stood and dressed quickly, pulling on her warmest coat before stepping out into the crisp autumn morning. The air was cool, the promise of winter settling in. As she walked down the path toward the garden, she felt the weight of the earth beneath her feet, steady and grounding. The garden, which had once been filled with vibrant colors, now stood bare, save for the skeletal remains of the plants that had flourished just weeks ago. But even in its barren state, it held a kind of beauty, an understated quiet that matched the stillness within her. Ilara sat on the stone bench, the frost from the night before still clinging to the surfaces around her. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the quiet of the morning settle around her. The world was changing, and so was she. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, she was learning to accept that change. Later that day, Ilara found herself in the kitchen, preparing tea. The familiar ritual of boiling water, measuring the leaves, and watching the steam rise from the cup brought a sense of normalcy, a moment of peace in the midst of her quiet upheaval. The house, once so full of voices and laughter, now felt empty, and yet Ilara had come to realize that the silence had become its own kind of companion. She had learned to listen to it, to sit with it, and in doing so, she had discovered something profound. As the kettle whistled, Ilara poured the hot water into her cup and sat at the table, her fingers wrapped around the porcelain, the warmth seeping into her hands. The house was quiet, save for the occasional creak of the wooden floors, the whisper of the wind outside. She had spent so much time waiting for something to fill the space that Mira had left behind, but now she realized that the emptiness was not something to fear. It was a space waiting to be filled, not with the past, but with the future. Her thoughts drifted to Iris. She hadn't seen her in a few days, and despite the subtle tension between them, she found herself yearning for the comfort of her presence. Iris had been a quiet anchor, always steady, always there with a knowing smile or a gentle word when Ilara needed it most. It was time to reach out. Ilara pulled out her phone, the screen lighting up with the soft glow of morning, and dialed Iris's number. The phone rang a few times before Iris picked up, her voice warm but tinged with curiosity. "Ilara? What's going on?" I was wondering if you'd like to meet today, Alara said, her voice softer than she had intended. Maybe a walk? I don't know. I just thought I could use some company. There was a brief pause on the other end of the line, and then Iris replied, I was hoping you'd ask. I'll be there in an hour. When Iris arrived, she seemed to bring the very essence of spring with her, her vibrant energy filling the space that had once felt so still. They walked through the town together, the streets covered in fallen leaves, the air crisp with the promise of winter. The silence between them was comfortable, each step in sync, as if their hearts beat in the same rhythm. They passed by the old church, the towering steeple reaching up toward the sky. It had always been one of Alara's favorite places in the town, a place where she had spent many quiet hours as a child. She stopped for a moment, the weight of memories settling over her, but she didn't mind. They were the good kind of memories, the ones that made her smile, even through the sadness. I've been thinking a lot lately, Alara said as they continued walking, about how much I've changed, how much I've been holding on to the past, to what was. Iris glanced over at her, her expression soft but knowing. It's natural, she said quietly. We all hold on to what we love. It's not always easy to let go. Alara nodded, her heart heavy with the truth of those words. But maybe I'm ready to let go. Not of her, not really, but of the weight. Iris stopped walking and turned to face her, her eyes searching Alara's face as if looking for the truth in her words. That's a big step, she said gently. But I think you're ready. I think you've always been ready. You just needed to see it for yourself. For a moment, Alara could only stand there, the quiet between them speaking volumes. The words were unspoken, but they didn't need to be said aloud. Alara had been afraid for so long, afraid of letting go, afraid of moving on, but now, in this moment, she felt the weight lifting. It wasn't about forgetting or leaving behind, it was about living again. Fully. Present. Free. She looked at Iris, and in her friend's eyes, she saw the unspoken understanding, the quiet acknowledgement of what had passed and what was yet to come. That evening, after Iris had left, Alara found herself sitting on the stone bench again, the stars just beginning to appear in the sky above. The quiet of the night was profound, but it no longer felt like a void. It felt like a canvas waiting to be painted. As she sat there, a single thought drifted through her mind, clear, simple, but powerful. I am not alone. The realization was both freeing and humbling. She had spent so long thinking that her grief was something to carry alone, that the weight of loss would define her. But now she understood that the love she had shared with Mira, the bond they had, was not something that could be lost or erased. It was something that had shaped her, yes, but it was also something that would continue to grow and evolve as she did. She stood and walked back to the house, the snow crunching beneath her feet, and for the first time in a long while, she felt ready to embrace what was next. Chapter 10: The Quiet of New Beginnings. Alara awoke to the softest of sounds, the rustling of leaves outside her window, the first stirrings of the day just beginning to break through the stillness. Autumn had deepened since she had arrived back here, and now, as the world outside transformed into a patchwork of gold and amber, she too felt herself on the edge of transformation. She no longer feared the silence that had once felt like an oppressive weight. It was a quiet now that held room for hope, for renewal. She had spent the last few weeks in this house, in this town, letting the days flow around her like a gentle stream. She had spoken with Iris, with the few neighbors who remained, with the town's elder women who would share tea and stories under the shade of trees. Slowly, in these conversations, in the slow turn of the seasons, Alara had rediscovered the rhythm of her own heartbeat, the pulse of life that had remained dormant for so long. Her thoughts turned to Mira, as they often did, but they no longer came with the same sharp edge of pain. Mira was still there, in the quiet spaces between breaths, in the whisper of the wind through the trees. Her sister had always been a part of her, and always would be. The grief had softened, its jagged edges rounding with time. Elara had learned, after all, that to grieve deeply was to have loved deeply, and that love was never truly lost. It had changed, yes, but it had not disappeared. It had become a part of the earth beneath her feet, the sky above, the wind in her hair. It was there, always, whispering in the rustle of autumn leaves. This morning, as she sat by the window looking out at the landscape painted in shades of orange and red, she felt something within her stir, a gentle, stirring urge to write. It had been a long time since she had felt that pull, the quiet need to put pen to paper, to give voice to the words that danced in her mind. In the stillness of this house, in the space that Myra's absence had created, Elara found her own voice again, and it was a voice that was no longer weighed down by sorrow. She picked up her notebook from the desk, feeling the weight of it in her hands as though it held the weight of the world. She opened it to a blank page, the emptiness inviting her to fill it with words. And she did. Words flowed from her, not with the frantic rush of desperation, but with a quiet, steady grace, as though the seasons themselves were guiding her hand. Days passed, and with them came a change in the air. The days grew colder, and the first frosts touched the ground. But within the house there was warmth. It wasn't the warmth of a fire blazing in the hearth, though the fire did crackle softly, but the warmth of new beginnings, of things left unsaid now finding their place in the world. Elara sat with Iris on the porch one evening, the sky painted in hues of purple and gold. They had been talking for hours, as they often did, about nothing and everything. The conversation had wound down, and for a moment there was just the quiet, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves and the distant call of a bird. "I've been writing," Elara said quietly, her voice soft, but with an unmistakable confidence that she had not carried in years. Iris turned to her, the light from the setting sun reflecting in her eyes. "That's wonderful. What are you writing?" Elara smiled, though it was a smile tinged with a bitter sweetness that felt like peace. I think it's time to tell the story. Not the one I've been holding on to for so long, but the one that's been waiting to be told. The one that begins with this house, with this town, with the changing seasons. The story of how grief became something else, something softer, something that made room for life. Iris didn't speak at first, but her gaze softened as she looked at Elara. Then, slowly, she reached over and took Elara's hand in her own. "I'm so proud of you," she said, her voice steady and full of warmth. "You've always had a gift, but you had to find the right time to share it. And I think you found it." Elara squeezed her friend's hand, grateful for the quiet strength that Iris had always given her. In the past, she had searched for something to fill the hole left by Myra's death, but now she realized that what she had been searching for was not something to fill the void, but to grow from it. Life, like autumn, was full of cycles. The falling leaves made way for new growth. The days continued to unfold, one after another, like the turning pages of a story yet to be fully written. Elara found herself spending more time in the garden, watching as the last of the flowers bowed to the cold, giving way to the bare branches of winter. But she did not see death in this change. She saw the promise of renewal. The earth, still, was waiting to bloom again. And so Elara began to write. Each word, each line felt like a step forward, a step away from the grief that had held her captive for so long. She wrote about Mira, about the seasons, about the love that had shaped her, and the quiet understanding that had grown between her and the world. As the first snowflakes began to fall, Elara stood on the porch, looking out at the quiet landscape before her. The world was still, wrapped in a blanket of white, but she knew that beneath the surface, life was still stirring, waiting for the warmth of spring to awaken it once more. She closed her eyes for a moment, breathing in the crisp air, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she felt peace settle within her. It was not a peace without sorrow, but a peace that had learned to exist alongside it, like the stillness of winter before the bloom of spring. The season she had left behind was no longer a place of loss, but one of transformation, and in the quiet of the world, she had found herself again.